welcome to the podcast, Lily Alexander. Would you, just be able to introduce yourself a little bit for some of the audience that I guess wouldn't know exactly what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. My name's Lily. I am from the city of Montreal. I am a writer, filmmaker person. I kind of do whatever comes my way, but these days I'm doing a series of video essays on gender and art and how the internet's incentive systems disrupt all of our usual ideas about these things. So an example of that would be a recent video I did about the TikTok algorithm optimizing for view time over everything, which results in these super hypnotic, weird videos that are almost like hacked to hold your attention. Um, that kind of thing. Let's see. Yeah. I'm trying to write some fictional projects. I work as an editor on other people's stuff. Mostly, I'm just happy to be here.
That's good to hear. I guess for the first topic, and I'm sure this comes up a lot, and you've explored this issue a lot already in your videos or this experience. Um, but I think this channel we've discussed gender identity a lot, usually involving especially masculinity and the manosphere and how gender can link to social perspectives and politics. But to back it up, I'm just kind of curious what your experience was transitioning and kind of learning about gender identity, like through that process.
Sure, absolutely. Um, it wasn't until I was 15 or 16 that I realized other people had gender, like, on purpose. I figured it was something we were all just sort of subjected to, and no one felt an especially strong affinity for whatever box they were assigned into. Um, I was one of these people with a kind of glass closet. I just I never really managed to fit in with dudes. Um, and yeah, so I don't feel like before transitioning I actually understood gender all that much because, well, I've honestly hadn't experienced it. I was just going with the flow, sort of. So coming out and realizing very quickly how differently people respond to you, as a trans woman, as a visibly trans woman, um, really threw me for a loop for a couple of years there. Um, and I've reached a much more comfortable place these days, but it definitely reveals that people are not always as cool with stuff as they think they are. You know, Even people who describe themselves as progressive did not necessarily take my coming out so well.
Oh, that's very interesting. Like, do you feel like your politics kind of were informed, or it was kind of like a feedback between like learning about your gender identity and maybe learning about where certain people sit personally, like on the political spectrum, in regards to how they reacted to your transitioning?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I totally understand the second part of
Like,
that question.
how did you like did you feel like your political perspective became more informed, like it became a bit more nuanced? It wasn't just like when people say they're progressive, you just see this kind of monolith of you believe this and this and this, or is it more like you see that there's a bit more variety in beliefs and values across the spectrum?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely would have described myself as like a progressive person before coming out. And what allowed me to kind of process my gender stuff was being immersed in the whole feminist wave of the 2010s. I was like a huge fan of Laverne Cox on Orange is the New Black. Um, so I would say even from there, politics are like what made it possible for me to understand my gender at all. And so absolutely I how I inhabit my gender has also affected my politics. um, for the first year or two. Honestly, it was I just found myself a very like distrusting and resentful person because all of these people I held up as like awesome feminists were suddenly treating me super weird. But since then, I think I've gained a little bit more hope in the value of human connection, of conversation. And certainly a big part of where my politics are at now is that I, um, live and am totally accepted as a woman, but can't relate to many of the women around me. I feel like I still have a bit of an outsider perspective, which I think is
That's
can be valuable.
yeah, no, that is interesting. Do you feel uh, like feminism has become more inclusive in regards to like trans women recently, or do you think that there's been more of a kind of rise of like turfs, for example, like J.K. Rowling? Like, which direction do you think this is kind of heading?
Hmm. Among feminists specifically, I think it's kind of tough to say because the feminist movement is like less of a thing than it was 10 years ago, I mean there are definitely feminists out there, but I don't feel like we're organizing as much around that label these days. The people who are tend to be are more likely to be the shitheads, if I may. Um, Unfortunately, I feel like, yeah, the face of feminism over the past, few years has kind of been the turfs, but that's definitely not representative of the whole.
Hmm.
I tend to think that since 2020, most people's politics have just become like a little more um, holistic, all encompassing, where it's kind of obvious that we can't just define ourselves by gender politics,
Mm.
you know? So yeah, I guess that's a tough question because I don't even know who I would ask. I feel like people aren't identifying that hardcore as feminists these days.
Hmm. How would you define feminism, like personally?
This is a great question. I actually was working on something about this like just yesterday.
Oh, perfect.
Um, I mean, I can tell you what I think it should be, and I can tell you what it is. I think what it is like everything that people have claimed is feminist, like the collection of movements that claim to work for women, whether or not I think they're good. Um, my ideal feminism is much more specific and has to do with like I guess abolishing the gender difference, like just kind of moving past that as something that matters on any broad societal level. Yeah.
Okay, so kind of like a move away from traditional gender roles is what you would consider feminism. Is that?
Uh yeah, but I mean, I guess for me it is really hand in hand with so many other struggles.
Hmm.
I think we can just move away from gender roles. I don't think that'll do much unless we also move toward like economic justice.
Hmm.
Um migrant justice, for example. Like a huge amount of the sexism that plays out in the world now is among like immigrants interacting with border authorities. It's among like undocumented people, the people who are not protected by um, new laws, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, this is the tricky thing. I feel like I can't define it on its own as one belief. It's more just like a part of where I'd like us to be at.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like if I can be a little more specific, the wave that I came up in, which is like queer trans stuff in the 2010s, I think tends to be a little more like pro gender than I am, if that makes sense. I've talked about the MOGAI movement before as an online movement, if you don't know, that basically had people defining hundreds of genders for themselves. These new, like highly specific things that, of course, didn't have any oppressive roles attached. Um, and that is not the wave I'm on so much, just because I don't think gender is like, I'm not pro gender, if that makes sense. It's just like something we've got to deal with.
Yeah, could you go into the MOGAI movement a little bit more, because I do remember, I think it was the first video I saw of yours, and
Hmm.
I really appreciated like the research, because I was not on Tumblr in that era, and it was like completely new to me.
Yeah, totally. Sure. So the MOGAI movement emerged in 2013, 2014 as a collection of people, mostly very young, kind of looking for a new language to talk about how they relate to the world. It kind of took the logic of trans identity, which is like, okay, I live as male or female, but I don't feel that way, and extended it much, much further. So anything that you felt you had an affinity for could be described as a gender or a sexuality. This is where we get people identifying with like clouds or
Mm,
shiny things or foxes or, you know, that kind of thing. It was a movement that kind of perceived all identity through the lens of gender and sexuality. Um, and petered out, I would say, in the late 2010s. People have fought me on that because, uh, I mean, at some point you've named the names and there's not much left to do. I think
mhm,
it was not a really a movement that had any broader ambitions.
mhm. Like, did you see it more as kind of a bottom up, like just kids trying to figure out their identity, than a sort of like, because one of the criticisms I see, especially talking with older people with regards to like trans identity and stuff of that nature, is like the variety and plethora of neopronouns that
Hmm.
come from a more like top down, like bureaucratic angle. And so I'm kind of wondering, like, do you see this as kind of like an ancestor of that, where it was kind of like then organizations trying to adjust to just how like broad and numbered the amount of gender identities could be, or do you think these are like unrelated? um,
I'm curious what you mean by top down in these people's criticisms. Like when neopronouns were being imposed from the top down, where do you see that?
uh, I guess I just mean like on a bureaucratic level, like when like if you're just signing up for certain things, and there'll be like a list of pronouns, not like in a aggressive sense, but just like these are, I think like if you go back like a decade, you wouldn't really see companies or government agencies really doing this. Um,
Hmm.
so I guess I'm wondering, like, did this kind of like begin that, or was it like, is this did this come from something else? Because it's also like, I know a conservative like conspiracy that this is like a, political correctness is leading to some sort of like Marxist totalitarianism or something like that.
Uh-huh.
So that's why I'm wondering, like, because I feel like talking about the actual origin of how that came about would at least kind of quell some of those
Hmm.
uh, people that are at least curious about like neopronouns, and how society has overall seemed to, in some sense, adjust it a little bit more to greater fluidity with gender identity.
Uh-huh. Sure. Okay. So the history of neopronouns is not something I know a ton about, but I know that they're much, much older than any of the Mogai stuff. I've seen them in texts dating back, I want to say to the 70s, but very likely earlier than that.
Mm,
I think, like, at its core, it's an idea that makes sense. I mean, the they exist to, at least in part, address an issue that I think a lot of people have with the English language, which is that the singular they is just like a kind of awkward thing to use to refer to someone as like they have. You know, you're not going to say they has. It's just it feels inconsistent.
mm,
Um, I think, and I don't have like sources to back me up on this, but my intuition is that neopronouns emerged as like a third thing that is not he or she, essentially. Um, and in that sense, I don't really understand the huge backlash to it, because this is an argument that you hear conservatives make all the time. I
Mhm.
can't call one person they, um, but when people are offered options to not call one person they, that also seems like an issue, which makes me think it's actually just about the people.
Mhm. Y-
Um, as far as those like super long drop down lists of pronouns that you get while signing up for, I assume Facebook, I think Facebook. Um, yeah, I guess, I mean, corporate inclusion is its own whole thing that always feels very out of touch with the community. I I would say that I don't understand the harm, certainly. But it is also, I'll admit, like, kind of funny.
mhm.
I mean, I've had my fun with it. When I first came out, or like a month or two before I first came out, I realized that Facebook had an option to allow you to fill your gender in just like a generic text box. It wasn't male, female, other. It was just like write in whatever you like.
Mhm.
Um, and so I dropped in a couple Easter eggs for people to notice. Like, I would just say that my gender was, that scene in Breaking Bad where Walter White is under the house where he was hiding the
Mhm.
money and he's just like sobbing under there.
Mhm.
Um, that's my own. That's my only real personal experience with those. Uh, I'm pro getting funky with it, basically.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I'm curious, where do you think that comes from, like the antagonism and discomfort that especially people on the right, but as you pointed out, also progressives can have when it comes to um, like normalizing kind of gender fluidity or even gender abolitionism or just getting funky with gender, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, well, I guess a lot about our society depends on gender roles, right? Like, um, we we basically, especially the panic around like young girls not being women or not growing up into women. I think probably comes from the fact that we rely on women to do a lot for society, and we worry about what'll happen if there are just fewer women. The fact that women are expected to do like a ton of unpaid labor in their daily lives, that can't be like discounted as a factor. We just, so much of our society is built on men do this, women do this. Um, and when you're like, no, whether or not you're trans, there's going to be some blowback there. I think it does offer a threat to how things are organized right now, and conservatives kind of like, the nuclear family and women in the home or whatever.
Yeah, there was an interesting, it was like in an anthropology class when I was in undergrad. It was written by like a queer author. I forgot their name, but they even talked about how like the concept of like having children is very much tied to gender roles and could be kind of like the root of a lot of like homophobia because there is like the fact that there's a community that they're like having sex, that they're like being in relationships but they're not having kids and it's not like
Hmm.
producing, and children are seen as kind of like this untouchable area, like it's non-ideological, it goes on both sides of the political fields where you talk about like children are the future and everything. I'm curious like what you think about that. I wish I remembered like the paper, but I remember like thinking, oh, that's like a really like taking something that seemed not ideological, like very just kind of accepted by all of society, but then still seeing that as like somewhat like gender based and potentially rooted in some form of like homophobia.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that. And I also see that in transphobia. I think the fact that many of us, are biologically infertile through transition is scary to a lot of people. Um, yeah, I guess like the this idea of like, sex is for having kids. Your bodies are for having kids is still very prevalent. Um, I do think um, I know so many queer people, so many trans people who actually want kids and who, for one reason or another, can't, which is a bummer. They can't afford it, or they maybe wouldn't be trusted to adopt or foster. Yeah, uh, it's a complicated thing because it's not like no queer people want anything to do with children.
Hmm. And then before, like, because I'm curious about like uh, talking about like what it starts with an M, the Tumblr.
MOGA,
What
yeah,
was it? MOGAI. Yeah.
yeah.
Before going into that, because I am curious about your idea of like how like online and like social media can like a kind of affect like just social movements and how they're um, you know how they're created, how they maybe sometimes fail, how they sometimes flourish. I think just before that, I am curious, like how do you? This might be tricky to answer, but how do you feel like you subjectively experience gender, if you do or if you don't? But I am curious about that, like because I feel like there's for me when I learned more about like trans people, it was um, you also start to think like why aren't more people trans, in the sense that why is there like a certain population where um, they very much feel internally that they are something different than what they were assigned at birth, and then there's a large amount of the population that the correlation between their assignment at birth and their gender identity throughout their life is the same. um,
Hmm.
so I'm very curious about like that element of especially being like a trans individual. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's one I wish I had a more straightforward answer to. I know that in my early days when I was like still in the closet, my gender feelings were very, very strong and clear to me, and kind of served as a driving force for me to get to where I'm at now. These days, I don't know that I experience it so strongly. I just know that like the life I'm living, the kind of interactions I have with people, the positions I'm put in are kind of just more comfortable for me. Um, like I don't know that I could point to any like particular reason that I'm a woman. Where I might have been able to a long time ago, but these days, I mean, there are all sorts of women out there. Someone with my personality traits and beliefs could be a man. I'm sure they exist. Um, yeah, yeah, it feels like something, and my last video was about this actually, just like kind of where gender is located, where it comes from. Um, and I think people reach all sorts of conclusions on this. Honestly, these days, like I guess you could say post transition, uh, how I live has little to do with any sense of identity and has more to do with like what's comfortable,
Hmm.
you know? Um, I don't prescribe to myself like, oh, today I'm gonna wear a skirt because I'm a woman and that's what ladies do. It's just like that's what I like to wear. Um, I find this is something that happens in a lot of people who've been out more than a few years. It's like the actual sense of gender sort of fades. I wonder if it's something that people just need to get them through the first few years of the whole thing. Um,
How do
like
you think like gender euphoria and gender dysphoria like fit into that? And because I'm very curious about that also as a like just as a cis man, there are certain things that I'll do that are, I guess they would be seen as masculine, that I do feel good about. Like, I don't know, just like a if you fix something, or like I don't know, just things that are like traditionally seen as like masculine, even if it's like dumb and it's kind of historically extremely gendered. I do still feel like that internal like, and I'm wondering like is that similar with trans people, like when especially when they're transitioning in the beginning, um like is it kind of directed a lot by if they feel kind of like euphoric and then maybe later on just comfortable doing certain actions, and like not comfortable expressing themselves, or like dysphoric doing other actions.
I would think so to some extent. Yeah. I mean, I can't speak for anyone other than myself, but definitely in those early days, my like whole gender awakening was fueled by just following what felt good, you know? Um I would go to Forever 21 RIP and just like try on a few things and kind of be amazed and marvel at like, oh man, like I'm allowed to do this. I'm in control of my life, you know? I think I think gender euphoria, at least for me, is like partially a realization that we have agency. I'm
Hmm.
just like, yeah, I can kind of do whatever and I want to do this and no one can stop me, you know? Um and certainly our choices are also guided by dysphoria, which I have trouble explaining as anything other than just like regular old pain and suffering, you know? We talk about it like it's a totally foreign thing to everyone who's not trans, but I know for me it feels much more mundane, I guess. I I know that certain things feel bad whether or not I know why, and I just gotta like follow what's gonna let me live, you know?
Hmm.
Um
Yeah, because I totally agree with that. Like I think there's just certain things. It's like the same as just watching a certain. I mean, I guess it would, the emotional severity of the dysphoria would differ in terms of what the activity is and how much you identify with it. But
mhm.
like, yeah, I don't know, like doing certain hobbies or certain activities, like maybe not even based on gender, but just the idea of how much does this align with how you like subjectively like feel about yourself, which doesn't really correlate with like any specific like thing that you can locate and be like, this is me and this isn't me. It's more just kind of like a feeling. Um,
Yeah. And if I could speak to that, I mean, I know that cis dudes supposedly sometimes go through like a bit of a crisis when they start losing their hair, when they start going bald. Um, that seems like a decent analog to me, as far as like, yes, I know I'm still the person I am without hair, but just being read in this different way, it feels very disruptive. You could say the same of well, this is kind of delicate, but when cis women need like a mastectomy for breast cancer, they will often choose to get breast implants put in. You know, I've known women who have, and it's not necessarily that anyone feels like they are or aren't a woman without breasts. It's more just like an awareness of how the world works, and I guess we're not immune to being shaped by all these images society throws at us of what men and women should be. I'm certainly not.
mhm. Yeah, no, it actually makes me think when you bring up the balding thing, because I mean, going back to like Beauvoir, there's the idea of like men are basically like, it's like a checklist of things, and then women are just, they're what that checklist isn't. So they're like the other. Um, and so like I do kind of wonder, because there is a lot of research on like when men feel like they're not like masculine enough, there's obviously like compensatory behavior, like they're going to act really aggressively and like violent. Um,
Mm.
I do wonder if that's like, I don't know, kind of a consequence of dysphoria in a way. Like if a guy feels entitled to partners or money, or he doesn't feel in some way that he's expressing his gender identity, which is this rigid checklist depending on the culture. Um,
Hmm.
if that's like a way to kind of an easy solution for him to deal with it.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I guess moving on, how do you feel with regards to social media, online spaces, specifically with trans issues, but also just in general, in terms of how they can, you know, help certain movements flourish, how they can sometimes cause issues? may even lead to regression at times within the movement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I think you said you're working on something related to this.
I am. I'm working on a big, big video about the pop feminism wave in the 2010s, which I touched on before. It was like very influential to me as a teenager. And that was a movement that unrolled like mostly online, and I think probably suffered for it. Um, I'm not at the point there where I feel comfortable like making any big conclusions, but I will say I don't think it's all bad. I think like for the trans community, I think the internet is huge for kind of obvious reasons, right? It could offer people a place to figure out their stuff like abstractly in like relative safety, at least like their life's not going to be in danger,
Mhm.
anonymously, before taking it offline. Um, so I think it's probably given people access to information and resources on the trans community that they wouldn't have had otherwise. Um, of course, the flip side of that is it's given people more access to everything, good and bad. Um,
Mhm.
Sorry, do you mind if I open my door for air real quick? It's getting a little
Yeah,
dark in
that's
here.
okay. That's fine.
Oh man, yeah, it's like a solid 30 degrees in this closet.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'm assuming your closet doesn't have air conditioning.
It does not at
No.
all. Okay, that's better.
Okay, glad to hear you can breathe. That's important.
All right. Um, yeah, I think there's a philosophical angle here that I'm like out of my depth on as far as how we embody things on the internet. I guess like in real life, the way you show who you are is by saying and doing things, and online, the way you show who you are, or you define yourself at least, is by saying things and like watching other people say things essentially. There's like a more limited scope of what can be done, I guess. It lends um it lends itself well to like mass efforts to, let's say, let's all email the governor of this state, or let's flood the servers of this website to shut them down. But it definitely like, you can't do everything with
Mm.
those types of actions. I know with pop feminism, its tricky thing was it needed to make money. This was an ecosystem full of people who were like professional activist writers, and so you have to kind of aim your focus at things that are going to attract a wide enough audience to turn a profit. Um,
Could you explain kind of the pop feminism movement just briefly?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So in the early 2010s, we kind of saw an upswell of people identifying as feminist and trying to take the stigma out of that word. Um, like my two go-to examples are Emma Watson and Beyonce. Um, Emma Watson gave this really famous speech about how we need like men to rally behind feminism and we need like more allies. Beyonce took like feminist aesthetics and implemented them into like her music and her stage show, and suddenly it was just this very like sexy, appealing thing for a lot of people. There was a big push to like destigmatize that word and just like get people more on board with the movement. And that's kind of like where I got involved, and that's like what started pushing me to the left as a teenager. Um, yeah, but the fact that it needed to. Sorry, let me take that again. Um, a lot of the like awareness raising was happening at publications like BuzzFeed and Jezebel, places that ultimately do need to make money. And So there was an incentive to, yeah, give messaging that is appealing but is not necessarily as effective. It was a very positive time. It was all about, empowering yourself, changing your life, less so about changing the world. Because as I have learned, as like a person who makes videos and would also like the world to change, you kind of can't make every project about how people need to like log off and stop reading your articles or watching your videos. It just doesn't work, you
Yeah.
know? Um, so that saw a big push towards like, reading our articles is participating in the movement, is activism, is brave. Watching a feminist TV show is going to change the world, that kind of thing. Um,
Mm. Yeah, I'm curious what you think of like kind of the idea of forming your political identity not based on action but kind of based off of like almost like consumerism in terms of just like where you put your attention. Because I'm like working on a video involving just like both video essayists and like live streamers, and how much of it is actually like changing things, if there is actually any real change, or is it
yeah.
just people that kind of are in their like echo chambers and they just like watching people kind of that they already agree with, and there isn't really any real change at all. And then of course like content creators like ourselves, we're making money off of it either way. There's very little like risk or sacrifice versus like if you were to do something maybe more radical. um but I'm
Yeah.
curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think probably the best way to form an understanding of the world in an ideology is like it involves a bit of both, a bit of uh passive, reading and thinking about stuff, and a bit of getting into the world, trying out your ideas, seeing how it works. Um an example I could give there is there's been some discussion of like, excuse me. There's been some discussion of like transformative justice and just like new ideas about how to bring justice to people who've been wronged that doesn't rely as much on punishment. And on paper, I had a very easy time with that. I thought, yeah, like we don't need to just lock everyone up who's done harm. We need to work with them to make them improve. That's a very easy position to take, but then I put myself in the position of actually trying to change those people, actually like involving myself in the process, and
Hmm.
it's taught me a lot about how, you can't just expect people to change because they're giving it a shot.
Hmm.
Being involved in like some accountability processes for like people in my friend group, in my community, has clarified, I think, what our instructions need to be and where the theory needs to be at. um there's a real risk of kind of theorizing yourself away from reality, if that makes sense. Like so much of philosophy feels really insular to me. It's about, some people described how the world works, and then some people criticize those descriptions, and other people criticize those descriptions, and it's all just so meta that like, what are we even talking about anymore?
Hmm.
um so much like popular discourse online is about the discourse. The arguments are about the arguments, about like, instead of weighing what certain people have to say, just like weighing their moral character and just like wading into petty beef zone. These are things that I think we can be reminded to not take so seriously by actually getting out and talking to people. Um, which is not something that I've like arrived at. This is an ongoing effort for me too. I'm like a extremely online chronic poster. That's my job. I mean,
Yeah.
uh yeah, but I think at least taking lessons from what works, what doesn't work is what I'm trying to do more and more of.
No, you're really like striking on kind of what I was thinking with talking about like video essayists, like live streamers, stuff like that. That it is kind of, it goes back to that idea of like how important is theory in action, like just philosophy in general. Like it's not a perfect comparison, but like when you go on like Twitter threads and there's like somebody said something that was either maybe ironically, they were trying to make like an edgy joke, or they were being genuinely discriminatory in some way, and then like another person responds, and then another person responds about something that they did, and then another person, the third person chimes in, and then now there's like
Yeah.
alliances forming, and it's almost like a reality show just all on like a Twitter thread. And you the beginning of it, like you don't even really remember what the initial argument that was at least somewhat tied to reality was, that oh,
Mm,
maybe this person's being like a kind of an asshole in some way to people. And it's just, it's so much space and so much time and resources is taken talking about like this discourse, which like that's exactly what you said. But it reminds me of just like philosophers will just get into, just they'll just go on forever just arguing about things that are not necessarily grounded in reality. And like if you look at, like, I don't know, for example, the pragmatist school of thought, between like Dewey and James, it's almost like a like Twitter thread. It's just petty grievances over like the what they think pragmatism actually is, and it's not settled still, at
Man.
least from my understanding. And it's like I don't, because in some way I'm like, well, pragmatism's hilarious because it's all about how theory should lend to action at the end of the day. But then when you look at the history of the pragmatist school, it's so theoretical, that it's
Damn.
almost, you can entirely dismiss it, and it's like, well, this is like chatter. And then it's like what are the things that are actually leading to any sort of like a constructive change? And that's what I'm, because I don't think like theory or video essays or streams or Twitter threads or anything, I don't think they're completely useless, but I think like 90% of it is like super, it's addict, like I'm sure you get addicted to just like the drama and the like back and forth and everything, because it's like these online personalities. But it's, I don't know, I don't know, I feel bad like participating or like giving my
Yeah.
attention to it sometimes.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I've had to start making the conscious choice to, if I'm on Twitter and I see someone I follow is like beefing with someone I've never heard of over someone I've never heard of, uh, I just I just have to make the conscious choice of, okay, I'm not gonna let this take up space in my brain. I have enough going on, you know? Um, yeah, yeah, the doom scroll is a powerful thing and like super demotivating, I think.
Mm,
And I will say, I think there is like, okay, like as if this is a controversial statement, but I think there is some role of theory, right? Um, I I think there are people who act and do like morally good things, but without a plan for how this will get us to the next thing. I guess you could take charity, some charities as an example of that action without theory. Okay, we're just trying to help people get through the day, but what comes after that? How are we building to something better, right?
mhm.
There does need to be, I think, a clarity of like long term purpose, um,
Yeah, yeah.
which is maybe why so many charities feel like they're just like putting a band-aid over things, um, like, well, it's excellent to relieve medical debt or student debt. It's great to like subsidize people's rent. What we should ultimately be working towards is a world where people are not getting rich off student loans and owning apartments.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess as a kind of final question, um, what do you think, in your own terms, is kind of good, like constructive change that like people can engage in, especially like in their like our age, like in your like 20s, and with like somewhat limited resources, and obviously not like the access to like government and stuff like that like older people have.
Hmm.
Just because also I was talking to my dad about this like literally this morning, so yeah.
Yeah. Well, no pressure to keep this in, of course, but what did your dad have to say? I'm curious.
uh Let me remember. I think because we were talking about kind of antinatalism and how a lot of people our age are very, because he genuinely asked, he's like, do you feel like people your age get like very kind of down with like environmental news? And I thought it was funny because I was like, that's, I mean, it's nice he's asking, but that's very like I'm surprised that there's like that's a question at the same time, because it's very like apparent. um
Yeah, like he must be new here, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It was more kind of just asking questions, which I do appreciate. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think I was just saying like I think yeah, a lot. I mean, I have a lot of friends that are like they don't want to have kids. Kind of going back to that, maybe that's becoming more of the norm. Also,
Hmm.
out of kind of a moral kind of like you don't want to raise people that aren't going to want to be alive in a world that might not actually be very good. Um,
Yep.
and a lot of people feel very like powerless, especially because it really does just feel, in terms of like real change, it's a lot of people in their 20s waiting for older people to kind of just pass away that have all of the power, because there's really no other method that isn't like at least like violent or just like super kind of or really time consuming, and actually just trying to engage in this process, which would be an uphill battle.
Yeah.
um, yeah, but yeah, I'm kind of curious what you would think um, collective change could be for like people our age.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think it's helpful to encourage people to get involved on a local level, you know? I think there's a lot more you can do in like your city, your neighborhood than you probably think. Like so much of local policy is decided at like screaming matches at meetings and because of protests that are probably happening in the cities of just about everyone listening to this, you know?
Hmm.
I think so. One group local to me that I'm admiring lately is the what is the Montreal Autonomous Tenants Union, which is trying to organize against specific bills that are like just terrible for uh, students and for young people and for renters in Montreal, um, that are
Oh,
going
I
to
had
like.
my when I was at McGill, I had my fun with the landlords in like student housing, like
Hell yeah, hell yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess um my my thing and like okay, to some extent like I'm no one to be giving advice because I'm not an activist, you know? But um I think we need to like build power for ourselves. We need to build organizations that will actually like have a large amount of sway for uh people who are getting screwed over because of like the climate situation, the housing situation, the education situation, the immigration situation. There's so many situations, man.
Mhm.
um yeah, you know, like if you're a renter, talk to your neighbors. Go to school board meetings, go to like city council meetings. um and I don't think any of this is like enough. We don't just do this and then we win some elections and we stop. This is like
Mhm.
this is a step along the road
Mhm.
because actually the amount of change we need right now is drastic, right? Like if we're going to get serious about climate change, uh it would have already happened if we could just like elect the right people.
Mhm.
I think. Yeah, I mean, I like to think there's some role of people like us, just talking about ideas. Um, but ultimately, like, the real work is going to happen by uh, building coalitions. I guess realizing what is actually in our best interest. Unionize your fucking workplace.
Mhm.
I say that as if I have a workplace.
Yeah, I don't think YouTube would ever let the YouTubers unionize, but
I don't even know what
I'm
that
sure.
would.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
have no
no.
idea. Well, thank you very much for coming on. It was a pleasure talking to you.
It's been a total pleasure. Yeah, yeah, it was great meeting you this hour. Really nice.
Yeah, no, thanks. And you can check out Lily's channel.